Automation is vital, isn't it? We have to be able to automate the refreshes of our full Power BI reports. But obviously over time, as they expand, that complexity can increase. And how's the best way to actually go through and make sure that all the components refresh correctly, validate that they've refreshed, and then refresh the main data set if that's also required? Depends what you're doing, but there's a lot of nuances that you need to be aware of. Hello, I'm Ross, the creator and founder of Geordie Consulting and Geordie Intelligence, the YouTube channel you're watching today. What I thought we'd look at or we'd talk about is kind of some of those orchestration suites that you can go through. What we're going to do is we're going to use the core one for Power BI itself in terms of actually what's really going on within Power BI. And we'll look at some of these pieces around Power Automate especially, which is really the orchestration engine that you should be using to augment and support the additional sides of what goes on within the Power BI native architecture. So let's have a look at some of the stuff that we can do with that. And firstly, what I want to do is have a look at this. Okay, now what you can see here, this is a flow that I wrote a long time ago, very early on in the model cycle. This was for the second edition. Okay, so this is the native Jasmine Dean one. And what this is doing is we can see it say, oh, it's succeeded, then it's failed. Well, it's failed. That's terrible. Why is it failing? You can get into that mentality with these Power Automate scripts. There's nothing wrong inherently with it failing. It's just badly handled. And I should handle it better if we wanted to. What's actually happening is these are colliding. Is really what's happening, that it's failing based on there's one already running. So what is happening if we come into here is one of the nice things. We can click on it. So what we can see is the first step is when a file's created, do something. So when a file is created in a folder, do something. So it's reading the information from the file. It's going to go through. We've got some information there. Based on that, it's then going to refresh this data set. And this data set is the Jasmine Dean 2 data set. Okay, so that's how that maintains and is kept up to date. That's a great thing to understand, that this capability of Power Automate is just there for you. And we could put in better error handling. So in the event that something's gone wrong, it does something different. So if we have a look at the one that's failed, for example, and we have a look, we can see it's failed because the data set, the refresh is already happening. So what's going on behind the scenes that causes that failure? So when it goes through and does the refresh work, the first thing it's doing is it's saying, right, what's happened to our first, which is the event history, is the first file, and then what comes through next is the, it's gone blank for a second, is the specific event and the volunteers list. So it then goes through and says, right, we need to read based on these. But the event history and the main list are the only two that it's going to look at. It doesn't look at the volunteers, this one. It's too old for it. But that needs to be processed. And then because it's being processed, it won't refresh. Because these aren't instants, it's not the second it goes through, there's a delay, it works to pick up the new one that's come through anyway. So this works, even though on paper it shouldn't work, but because it all happens within a minute time frame, it works. But what it leads to is two erroneous starts or triggers that will then fail because the data set is already being refreshed. Worth knowing, and it's worth understanding kind of the interplay of what goes on there, which I thought we should start with that. So what have we got with these flows? Okay, so in terms of our main flows that really go on and deal with everything, we've got kind of this one here, which is refreshing the main Newcastle report pack. But what we need to think through is being in the position of saying, right, what do you want your automation to do? One of the things that we should be doing as well, and one of the things that I'm looking at saying, right, I need to make some tweaks to this and updates and change what goes on, is we've got so many now data sets coming in for each park run. You can see here, we've got all these park runs where we've got the data being drawn down from the site, collated and starting to be built. And what we need to do really is get to that point where we've got a nice way of automating that whole build process to then refresh a cycle. And obviously at some point as well, yeah, it would be nice to work through and say, right, we're going to put in and put together not just the Newcastle Park runs or the North Tynes or the Sunderland, but actually start to build in Northumberland as well, and potentially work out what a full holistic park run report would look like for that region. And before all that, obviously, we have to make sure we've got the refresh cycle worked out correctly, because it's pointless, isn't it, if we do anything else? So this is why we've got this list of this table set here. Okay, so one of the things that we're going to do is obviously we've got juniors separated out, and potentially we should change our whole refresh build and the whole way it polls to poll juniors differently and not try and poll juniors on a Saturday. And then we can also go through, and so we've got the local authorities flagged, we can potentially do other things. So what other areas should we do? Is there a different NHS authority for these? Is that something we should be looking into putting in? But one of the things we will be doing is putting in the max event, so the actual max number of the event, because one of the things that goes on is obviously for a limited period, events update the results. So at the moment, it'd be nice if we actually went through and said, well, for the last 5 weeks, let's just go make sure we do repoll the last 5 weeks each week rather than just the latest week. So things like that are kind of where we go. And this is that incremental improvement side. One of the things then as part of that would be to say, well, actually, let's start to put in place updates to these. So it would be nice if we could go through and poll and put in like a last refresh date time value for when was the last time these were refreshed, so that we can go through and make sure that we can then use a Power Automate job and use a single one to go through, refresh each one that hasn't been refreshed in the last, say, 24 hours or whatever you want to do. And that can then be triggered and it can go through and do it. And then you've got separate ones that will run through. And because it's going based on the last 24 hours, it won't update. You know, we can actually make sure that everything runs through and the refreshes are maintained. And then in terms of how do we maintain that, the best way is then to actually start to put together a log file or a log list. And these all work as well. So we can then use a list and actually start to record in that list what's gone on. So what would all that look like? So we're going to click on the cog. I'll zoom in a bit just so you can see. All right, we're going to select list settings. Okay, list settings. So from list settings, it gives you the chance. You can see these are the columns that we've got. Okay, you can see there's more columns than we normally expect to see. So what I thought we would create is we're going to add 3 columns to this. Okay, so the first one we're going to create is going to be a number. Latest event number. Okay, I use camel case for these, but again, it's to do with the way it actually separates it out when it does the coding. I could be very wrong in the way I do these things. This is one of the things, the guidance on this changes regularly, and it becomes very challenging to say, well, this is the best way to go, this is the wrong way to go. Right, so we're going to say in 0 decimal places, this is always going to be a whole number. We don't need this, we don't need that. Default value is a number, add into the default view. You can untick that, or potentially it'll be hidden. I'm going to leave this in the default view, but I'm going to hide the next 2. Okay. Let me zoom out here because I can't see where the OK is. And on the right hand side, you can see we've got the OK. It's hidden by me because my big fat heat's in the way. But OK. So we're going to click OK. Right. So we've got the number. So that's going to be the maximum event number that we've got. Right. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to go in and we're going to say, right, we're going to create a column. Okay. And this is latest event date. Okay. So what I thought we'd do is we get the date of the latest event that took place. So that's going to be a date time. We'll zoom in out there again so you can see. Date time. Date only. Standard. Yeah. Okay. So we've got a value there. So that's just going to be a date. We'll scroll over and we'll hit OK again. Oh my goodness me. And then lastly, what we're going to do is we're going to pick create column. This is going to be last refresh date. It's going to be date time. We want date only for this as well. Okay. I'm going to go through this. Actually untick to add this to the default view. I said I'd untick the other ones around. I forgot. Sorry. So it's not going to appear in our default view. So we've now added a few columns and some logic to what we're going to do, haven't we? Okay. And that's really important because that's what we're going to find we want to have there. So what I'm going to do is if we went in, come back to our tracked events, what I'll have to do is I'll go through, and when we run the next refresh, we'll go through and we'll make sure that I'll update the main pull so that it actually populates those two columns as well. Let's refresh this. Hopefully these two columns are right. Yeah, latest event number. Okay, so if we go, I know Jasmine Dean's off the top of my head. Okay, so the latest event number, let's say this is no, and the latest event number is 219. Latest event date, it was Saturday, and the latest refresh date, leave blank. Okay, so the plan is very much that what should happen would be that our data flow, okay, so our flow script, will run through. And what we'll do is our main pull that builds all the Excel jobs goes on to this. So if you remember, we have down here, and if we look at raw, because it was the first one, which is, this is what Jasmine Dean's data set is, we've got all the historic information there that we've got. So we can then go in and say, right, when that's done, when we've pulled everyone's, let's go through and start the refresh cycle. So it'll go in and it will read the tracked events and build a table for the ones that need to be refreshed. And what we will then go through and say is, right, we're going to go in and refresh everything. So what we're probably going to need as well, actually, is another one, which will be the GUID for the data, for the data flows for those. Okay. Once we've got all that, what we can do is we start going through. So we'd actually say, right, let's go back into here. And we can say, right, we're going to create a new one. And you can see you've got this whole long list of things that you can do. And you've also now got AI components. So you can actually start to describe and design it with that way. Okay. We could try. Should we try? Oh, this is never going to work, is it? Okay, this is where it gets really convoluted with this whole thing. So using our tracked events list in Jasmine Dean Park Run SharePoint site. Refresh the data flow. Actually, I don't think we will need this one because we can look the list of data flow. No, we will, yeah. We are going to need the GUIDs. Refresh the data flow corresponding to each row. When the refresh date is before the last event date. See what that does. That's not doing too bad for each condition, okay. That works. Okay, keep and continue. Okay, so let's create that flow. Okay, so we've got a recurrent, so it said, well, you want to recur it on something. So we're going to say every day, that's fine. Get items from there, tracked events. This has worked for each. So for each item, for each body value. We've then got a condition. For each last refresh, that should be, I think that looks right. So if it's true, then what we would do is refresh a data flow. Okay, we would refresh the one in the workspace in Jasmine Dean. And then this is where we would need to work out, I think, but they've all got DF and that, so we might be able to do that actually. We'll do some experiment with this DF underscore. I have to check that, but I think, yeah, we'd get body thing like that. Okay, but it's, in essence, we'll figure this out. But what we would look to do is get to that point where we've got these GUIDs coming through correctly. So it's always going to be possible. We can pull through that list as well. So we can pull through a table of here's the list of GUIDs, and then we can use that to map a name to a GUID, do these. But you can see this took, seconds to get this started. And the idea with this is this would then go through and run the refresh. What you would need to do in practical terms, just because too many data flows refreshing at once will crash, is you would need to put in a wait or a pause. Okay, so we need to use a delay. Okay, so we put a delay in. You could experiment with delay until, but I think delay would be the right way. So add a delay, put in, say, 5 minutes for each one. Okay, which just, it's going to go through, it'll do it. With the 20 or so, that's obviously, it's an hour or over an hour for, sorry. So you go through, an hour and a half, something like that. It will go in and do that roll for you though, but it will just quietly tick over and everything's then refreshed at the end of it. And then the last job would be, right at the end, once it's gone through and completed all this, you would put in a refresh the Power BI data sets themselves. And again, you could either choose to put those into a list, or you could choose to do, if it's one, because we've got to that point, now refresh this at the end. And that's as simple as going through, and obviously you've already seen that action in place. It's a refresh data flow, refresh a data set. Okay, these jobs are quick and easy to put together, and they're very powerful. As I say, in terms of what you can do as well, is we could go in, we could add a list for status and actually put in what happened to each one. Okay, we've also got, obviously, we can put in history on a list as well, so we can actually track over time what changes in the list if you really want to get to that level of granularity. There's an awful lot of power that's just baked into these, what are fundamentally very simplistic tool sets. And in terms of the orchestration of this, you go, well, why would you want to do that? Why don't you just use refresh? And it's because the refresh cycling that we have for Power BI is, in general, it's a really short, it's not short, it's like a half-hour window. So we can trigger a refresh, we've got to wait half an hour. If our refresh takes 35 minutes, we've got to wait an hour. Whereas we can use a data flow, we can use our Microsoft flows or Power Automate scripts. They can go through and be triggered by the completion of a refresh of a previous refresh. So we can do all that. So in essence, what we could do is we could say, we could even get to the point where we've got our data flow, we've got our list of GUIDs in there, which we can do quite easily. We can go in each one of these that we have. This is the GUID that we would need. This is the data flow GUID. This is what we need to feed to it. So we can harvest all of those quite easily. We can then use those to build up a table structure that would go through, and it would say, well, based on this, which one's this? And when the last one refreshes, go through and do the next one. And we can put all those in. That's quite easy. And that would be part of the trigger that would go through. Is the trigger would be, what's the name of the data flow that's just finished? It's this one. What's the name of that one? And we just work through. And it's more about thinking what's going on rather than anything else particularly transient or difficult. It's just working out how those things are going to flow. And that's one of those areas that is really difficult when you first get started, because it's easy, but it always feels a lot more complicated than it really is. Okay? Getting this right is really important, because if it's wrong, what you will find is that your data sets don't refresh as well as they should do. You add delay, and most importantly with manual cycles, is you add cost. There is a cost to somebody manually having to go and do something. Not to mention, and this is in my mind the most important part, nobody likes being the bearer of bad news. What? Right? I'm going to be the bearer of bad news now and tell you that nobody likes to be the bearer of bad news. If you ask somebody to go and build report content for you, and then they're going to deliver it to you and it's bad, inherently they will try and soften the blow or do something different with it. That doesn't make them a bad person, but that fundamentally isn't what you want. What you want to have for your business to succeed is consistency. Consistency comes from automation. You want to know that when I look at that report today, it's based on exactly the same way of processing the numbers as yesterday, last week, last month, and that I can then rely on it to use as a forecasting tool or to project that values into the future, or even to apply my own logic to it. Because again, we've been discussing, haven't we, in terms of forecasting logic. Is it logic? Should we be using the mathematical side, or is there something else to it? I honestly believe there's something else to it. But I understand why we would start with here's our generated forecast, but then I think we need to put that layer of human intelligence on top of it. But anyway, you need to get that balancing act right, don't you? You need to make sure that when you are running your refreshes, that when you are doing those things, that it is automated so that there is no temptation or anything like that. And that's even that's the wrong word. There's no, I don't want to be fired. I'm going to try and soften the blow to it, because that's not great. And that's as well why one of those things where we say, well, we're going to build these massively well-designed, well-manicured report packs. If you do that and the data suddenly changes, or something suddenly goes wrong, suddenly those report packs often look really terrible because lines just become invisible or values can't change. If you've structured it around what these values are today and they suddenly become different, you've got a problem. So it's getting that balancing act right, isn't it? Again, context. This is the whole point why we keep talking about context, context, context. Understanding the importance of that refresh cycle and the automation of that refresh cycle goes a long way to transforming the way your business handles data. If you like what you've seen and you think to yourself, do you know what, I could really do with some consultancy to support us through that in our business, and to bring together all those disparate sources of data that we've got, get in touch with Geordie Consulting. There's a link down below to request a meeting. Have that meeting with them. Go through and share your problems, share everything. If they can help you, they will. If not, that's fine. At least you've often in the act of just discussing it helps you bullet point what it is you need to do. For now though, stay safe, take care, ta-da.